notacon.
My name is Rick Wash, and I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Michigan. And today I'm going to talk about kind of a current emerging field in a research field right now called the economics of security, or the economics of malevolence in cyberspace. And this field kind of studies what makes people do things in security. So why do products sell or don't sell? Why would people want to hack? Things like that are all valid game for this research field. And what I'm covering today is kind of an overview of some of the interesting recent results. And the field is only about 3 years old at the moment, so this pretty much covers most of the interesting results. But it should be a good primer and kind of give you a clue of what a lot of the current researchers are thinking about right now. So, in particular, I'm going to talk about two sub-areas. One is kind of the theory of security, the economics of security in particular, and how things put together and why. And the second one is what happens when you put these theories into practice. What do we see out in the real world? So to start with, I want to start with a paper from a well-known economist named Hal Varian, who tried to model just the basic security situation. So imagine we have two people, X and Y, X1 and X2. These people are trying to put forth some effort to get something done. And whether they get it done is some function f of their total effort. So you combine these two efforts in some way to get the total effort, and then this is the value if they get it done. And then each of them has their own cost for putting forth effort. So putting forth effort is more costly, but it might pay out. So this is the basic model we have. And then there's 4 different ways of effort. What happens if the total effort is what matters? So if you and I work together, the total amount of our effort is what determines our total payout. The next one is a best shot case. What happens if only the person who puts the highest forth effort, that's what determines the amount of profit we make, and nothing below that actually matters. There's the weakest link case, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, of what about the minimum effort? If you have 2 pieces of security technology, the weakest link is all it needs to go through to break through frequently. And finally, the more explicit model of an adversary, of saying the adversary is the Y guy in this case, and he's working directly against this defender of the X guy. So if he puts forth more effort than the X guy, then F is negative. And some results from this. First of all, in the total effort case, reliability is determined by the agent with the highest benefit to cost ratio. All the others free ride. So in this case, in the model, you end up with whoever's got the most benefits per cost. So if I get more benefit, then if I put forth a little bit more effort and you put forth a little bit more effort, but I get more benefit out of that, then, which basically means I have a lower cost of putting forth effort, then I'm going to put forth all of the effort, and you're going to slack off and do nothing, which in economic speak is called free ride. And it turns out that in this case, that's actually too little effort. Ideally, you want both people putting forth some effort, and you'd have a little bit more effort total than what people are individually incentivized to do. So this is a dichotomy between what the individuals would choose and what the group should choose. In the best shot case, it turns out that the guy with the lowest benefit to cost ratio is the one that determines the total amount of effort. All the others put forth the exact same amount of effort as the guy with the lowest benefit to cost ratio. And it turns out this is as good as the group can do, which is a nice result. In the weakest link case, the reliability is determined by the guy with the highest benefit to cost ratio, all the others free ride. But in this case, too much work is actually exerted. If the group as a whole would choose, they would actually choose less because someone else would be doing it, because someone else with a lower benefit to cost ratio would be working. Finally, in the adversarial case, you get some very interesting results. What really matters is how the cost-benefit ratio of the defender compares to that of the attacker, like in the other three results. And it turns out if the cost-benefit ratio is lower, the attacker gives up, and the defender does just enough security to keep him from attacking him. However, if the cost-benefit ratio is higher, then the defender works his ass off, and the attacker keeps doing as much security as he can to make sure he's going to have to work hard to get in. So, and you actually kind of see this in the real world. If they're actually going to get in, you're going to be working really hard. But if you're a mom and pop that they're not going to attack because your benefit to cost ratio is lower, or their benefits are less because you're not worth very much, then you end up doing just enough to keep them away. So this is a very simple model that turns out to have very interesting intuitive results in the real world. And one of the main reasons I included this is to kind of show no one in this room seemed to me, when I looked around, flinched when I gave the definition of adversary as the guy who's working exactly opposite goal of you. And this is the normal definition of adversary when we do security. He's the guy who wants to get into my thing, I want to stop him. It's the exact opposite goals. And this is actually the only paper that I know of that actually has that. In economics, they tend to model people as self-interested agents. And what that means is everyone's out for their own good. I want to get as much money as possible. Cameron wants to get as much money as possible. When that happens, when you understand people that way, you get a lot more insight into why they might be attacking you. And that turns out to be very important to understanding why things happen. If someone's trying to get to your database, it's not because they don't like you. It's because they want to profit on their own. Sometimes there is this adversarial relationship. A lot of denial of services or defacements, for example, have that property. But in general, it's because people want something of their own. It's not because they don't like you and are specifically working against you. You just happen to be the one that has what they want. So another example I'm going to go into is some theory about how much should security cost. And it turns out there's some interesting results from the economics literature that apply here really well. In the first case, this is the concept of an externality. And think about when I'm blasting my stereo, when we had all this music down here last night. This was really loud, and it quite possibly annoyed some people. However, when I was deciding how loud to play it, I didn't take all those people I'd annoy into account. So this is an example of an externality because I didn't take their interest into account when I was making my decision. Classic example from economics is the pollution. If I'm a company producing something, I produce lots of pollution, I don't take into account everyone else's discomfort from the pollution. I just take into account my profits. If I can do better by polluting more, then I will, regardless of the fact that everyone else suffers. So this is the definition of what an externality is, of basically not taking it into account. And there's two major solutions that economics usually uses. And what they do is they try to force people to take these things into account. The first one is a tax. If I'm going to pollute, the government can tax me to try to make sure I don't pollute it as much. And the goal would be to set the tax just high enough that I pollute at the correct level instead of polluting it at a much higher level. And second is property rights. This one is much more interesting. It says that if you assign rights to someone on one of the two things, so for a stereo example, you assign the rights to the audio, the noise pollution, the airwaves, to one of the two people, and then they can, so if there's too much noise here and the guys upstairs have rights, then they can sue you and collect money for your polluting the air, and then that will cause them to reduce it down to the optimal level. Same thing with pollution. And a great theorem, which is actually won a Nobel Prize a number of years ago, is from a guy named Ron Coase, and he says, if transactions costs are low, assigning property rights will achieve the social optimum level of the externality. So if you assign property rights to the polluted air or the polluted lakes, then the people who have those rights can sue the polluters, and it turned out that you'll get the socially best level of pollution, where you balance the harm that's being caused to the environment with the good that's being caused by someone actually making something. Furthermore, when the costs are low, it doesn't matter who you assign the rights to. Whoever you assign the rights to, the other person will start negotiating. And as long as the cost of negotiating is low, then it can work out quite well. Security is a great example of an externality. Think, for example, of the compromised machines that are used as zombies to attack others, like the eBay and Yahoo denial of services that happened a number of years ago. So, in this case, when I was deciding how much to secure my machine, if it was used in this attack, I didn't take into account the possible harm that could be caused on eBay and Yahoo. So this is a great example of an externality. Firms don't incorporate all this possible other uses against other people. Because I and a million other people were insecure, eBay and Yahoo had security problems. If we were secure, then they would have been fine. So this is a great example of an externality. And this, in general, this results on an underspending on security from a social welfare perspective. Too little money is spent on security, which I'm sure if anyone has actually been in the room trying to make security decisions along this line can probably agree with. So one possible solution would be to assign property rights in security. So when Yahoo was attacked, they could sue the people that were used as zombies. That didn't happen, and that's because there's a number of reasons this doesn't work. First of all, enforcement costs. Trying to find everyone who attacked Yahoo and suing them would cost much more than they lost from those attacks. Trying to sue 2 million people is just not really practical. And finally, it's really easy to lie. If you want to do it before the attacks, oh yeah, I was going to hack you, please pay me money. It's really easy to lie about things if you try to do it beforehand, and then the enforcement costs come in afterhand. So when that happens, property rights don't really work, because this is essentially when the transaction costs are high, and the theorem said when transaction costs are low. So this is a known problem in security right now, and there's a number of people that are working on trying to find ways to get around this, but it's how your security matters to other people. Another really interesting result from economics is called a market for lemons. This was actually another Nobel Prize winning idea. And imagine we have people buying used cars. I still didn't fix that slide, did I? Imagine we have people buying used cars. So on the left, we have someone trying to sell a number of used cars. They range in value somewhere between $100 and $1,000. And then we have a bunch of people trying to buy used cars. And their opinion of how much the car is worth ranges from $100 to $1,500. And in general, the buyer thinks that the car is worth about 1.5 times what the seller thinks it's worth. So if they both knew exactly what the car was and got to play with it, the buyer would think it's 1.5 times as much as the seller. So the average